We've moved to what we'll call window number 2 on this side. The title of this window would be The Last Supper. We're still obviously in Easter week. We're on that Thursday at the Last Supper after his entrance to Jerusalem the Sunday before. At the Last Supper, pictured here at the institution of the Eucharist in this case, with his apostles at the table with him, Christ in red, the chalice in his hand, bread on the table. We even have Judas in the background at the top of the table, this central medallion outlined in that teal green in this case, but the 12 apostles at the table. And again, I'm pointing out Judas at the top, slinking away. He's kind of a greenish character up there, slinking away with his coins for having betrayed Christ. As this Easter story continues, we have no history medallion, and we have no doctor of the church on this side because of the shortened nature of the window, but we have the next gospel writer, which in this case is St. Luke, always symbolized by, in this case, an ox, a sacrificial animal, because of the sacrificial nature of his gospel, again with the imagery from the book of Revelation with the 6 wings and 6 eyes, in this case illustrated here, the ox and St. Luke, that third gospel writer. The cross narrative, the wood of the cross narrative, will continue across the top here before the crucifixion. In this case, the wood that Abijah and his queen have stripped of its precious metal has been discarded and ends up in the pool of Bethesda in Jerusalem. Here it's being imaged with an angel stirring that. We know the pool of Bethesda we know the pool of Bethesda because of its curative power. In this case, there's a lame character on the left up there with his crutch that's looking to be healed. The angel stirs the waters of the pool of Bethesda, which will be the wood of the cross. It's been stripped of its precious metal in the image before it and ends up in the pool there. The third window on this side, the Easter story becomes highly dramatic at this point. The title of this window would obviously be The Agony in the Garden. The central medallion, as we've carried all the way around the church, on this side with the Easter story, we've progressed from Palm Sunday and the entrance into Jerusalem, the Last Supper, and later that night in the garden. It's darker. Most people that look at these windows, always one of the first things they notice, this central medallion outlined in the very dark blue in that same upper 2/3 of the window, but at the same level as all the central medallions. In this case, Christ with the red cloak and white, kneeling in the garden. His faithful 3 apostles are sound asleep below him, and the angel, in this case with the cup that was spoken about as to whether or not it could pass. A little more imagery in this picture. Below the apostles now is the next doctor of the church, in this case St. Jerome. He's always recognized, most people understand him as being the translator of the Old Testament and the New Testament. If you could see closely at the book that is upside down at his feet, it says Vulgate on it, which was what he produced. He had to learn Greek and Hebrew in order to translate the Bible. He did the Old Testament from Hebrew into Latin, and then he would do the New Testament from Greek to a readable Latin, which is what the Vulgate is. So that's there for us to identify this as St. Jerome. The lion often identified as an image of the boldness of his spirit. He lived an extremely ascetic life in Bethlehem, doing this lifetime's worth of work. He's often associated with a term called memento mori, which is what is symbolized by the skull that's above his head. Just above the lion and St. Jerome, there's a skull with a cross above it. The symbolism there is in Jerome's mind. We don't have all day to do the work that we need to do. We will all die, and if you have something to do, you should get busy. And in this case, it's always associated, when we see pictures, paintings of St. Jerome, it's usually accompanied by a skull, which is a reference to that, remember you will die, and you don't have all day to do whatever it is you need to do. And at the bottom now, with the historical medallion, or history medallion, which we followed around the church in these tall windows, this is much more local here. In this picture, in the dark outlined square, on the right with a mitre is a bishop, and that's Bishop Loris. Bishop Loris was the bishop. He was in Iowa at the time, but it included this entire area. He's ordaining, in this case, Lucian Galtier and one other priest who will make their way to Minnesota. They've been missioned to come to literally St. Paul and establish a church for the few Catholics that are here. He would build a small chapel, which I thought there was one at Pig's Eye. There is one on the property. There's a small, beautiful little chapel on the property of St. Peter's Church in Mendota, which is associated with Lucian Galtier, literally the first priest in this area, commissioned or at least ordained by Bishop Loris and sent here, Loris, L-O-R-A-S. That history medallion there, in the same place it exists everywhere else. If we move past then the doctor of the church, in this case St. Jerome, the central medallion of the agony in the garden, and we continue with a highlight or climax in the story of the wood of the cross. Now we've gone to St. Helena actually finding it after the crucifixion. It precedes the crucifixion window, but it is in line with the rest of the narrative. St. Helena was an elderly woman, the mother of of the emperor Constantine, who is commissioned by her son to go to Jerusalem in a time of constant heresy and to establish some of the workings of the church in Jerusalem. She's anxious to find the cross. There's a temple to Aphrodite or Venus that was built there by Hadrian 100 years before. It will need to be raised and made to disappear so they can excavate. But the story says in 326 AD, St. Helena, her name is there, the namesake of this parish, she will find 3 crosses. In this case, the bishop, Macarius, is with her. That's the individual in green on the right with the crozier and the mitre, and the empress, St. Helena, in the center with the crown on. And then the 3 crosses, 2 of them at her feet, and the one that they've identified as the true cross in red to our left behind St. Helena. As we continue the Easter story on this east side of the church, the window gets even more busy. It's dark, similar to the agony in the garden window. This would be the crucifixion window. It's what's imaged in the central medallion of this window, in the same place it is in every other window, 2/3 of the way up. Christ is crucified in this image. There is a lot going on if we concentrate not on anything else, but on that image in the center of this window. There is another doctor. We'll get to St. Augustine in a minute. We'll get to the historic or the history medallion at the bottom, and we'll finish with the wood of the cross at the top. But just for a moment, let's pay attention to the crucifixion at the center of this window. We have, in addition to Christ's image in the center at his crucifixion, we have angels on either side with chalices catching blood from his hands. We have the hand of God above him, facing down. Below him, we have now an image that is connected with part of the theology of this wood of the cross story. Part of the idea that a story about the fantastical story like this exists from the Middle Ages about the wood of the cross was the interest of people during that time, and this may go back to even the time of St. Helena finding the cross, was to connect Adam to Christ. And in this case, below Christ's feet, there's another skull. It's not the same skull that the memento mori skull in the image of St. Jerome in the window previous. In this case, it would be the skull of Adam. And now we've made a perfect connection in this case with Adam from the beginning and the wood of the cross, Christ crucified on that wood, and the blood dripping down to literally the grave of Adam below him. So we've made full circle. We've connected Adam with a new Adam in Christ above him. Below that, more imagery with the 12 sheep, in this case the 12 apostles, that are fed by this blood from the cross. We also have John in red on the right and Mary in blue on the left. We move from this image of the crucifixion to the doctor of the church, in this case it's St. Augustine. It says Veritas above his name. There are plenty in this image to help us identify St. Augustine, even if his name wasn't there. He's holding a book that's open to Romans 13 that's always credited with the passage from St. Paul's letter in the New Testament to his conversion, which is what it's open to there, to give up the reckless life that he lived and change himself. But that's open to Romans 13. In this case, Veritas, his work with the truth. One of the more interesting images in the picture that people don't know about or are very curious about is the little child in blue holding a spoon in her hand or his hand with water there. That image has to do with an iconography story or iconic story about St. Augustine walking on the beach in Hippo along the Mediterranean, struggling with his ability to write about the Trinity. And as he walked on the beach contemplating what he would write, how he would understand it, how he would make it understandable to others, he prophetically bumps into a child who appears to be spooning water from the Mediterranean into a bucket. And he casually mentions to this child that you'll never be able to fit all of the water from the Mediterranean into that bucket. And the child mentions to him, schools him a little bit, and says, and you'll never be able to figure out the Trinity. Which speaks to our theological idea that there are some things that are not open to us in understanding. At the bottom of this window, the next historical medallion in this series or narrative that goes around the church, this goes to a history of the church, certainly in America. It's titled Bishop John Carroll. The date is 1790. He was actually consecrated, it says at the bottom, the consecration of the bishop in England. He would be consecrated as a bishop in England and then sent to be the bishop of this country. He would go to Maryland, he would be the first bishop, and would be literally the bishop of the entire country. So certainly part of the Catholic Church's history in North America. Bishop John Carroll in the center of that picture, or in the center of that medallion. And then at the top, we have a few more narratives. This is still the narrative at the very top in the arch, still the narrative. It's got a circle around it compared to some of the other ones. This is St. Helena, and the story being told here is her work to identify the right cross from the three that she discovered. She found the three crosses Christ and the two thieves, but didn't know which was which. She would expose some lame, or in this case, a dead person, to the crosses, and they were revived when they were exposed to the cross that Christ was crucified on. That image is pictured here.